All right, while those are getting passed out, do a little bit of introduction. So, last year, we began a study in our groups that was about the opportunities and challenges of service, and then each quarter we did a different group. So we did younger, middle, older, and then in the last group was leaders. Just one disclaimer, as I said, I was only going to kind of decide who younger people were, and everyone else had to, put themselves in wherever they felt. I wasn't saying who's older, who's middle. That's your decision. This year, we're kind of continuing that study. So if you think about that as the beginning of a series of studies on how we as a group work and serve and shine our light as a group together, this year's studies quarterly are a continuation. So this year, our studies are on practical applications of love in the church. So in quarters 2, 3, and 4, we'll look at the necessary attitudes for a servant, bearing the burdens of one another, and encouraging one another to maturity. And today, or 2 Saturdays ago for the group meetings, we're going to talk about investing in the lives of others on that topic. And so what we want to do is we're going to talk a little bit about what does it mean to invest. We're going to think about some times when people invested in us. And then we're going to look examples in the scripture of investment and talk a little bit about the cost of investing. So first, just a question to ponder. What is investment? Why do we invest? You can actually answer, by the way.
There's growth from it.
Okay, so Jerry, you said there's growth from it. What do you mean? Like, what does that mean?
Monetarily is the main thing I think of with investment, but as far as people, like it's putting into someone, and then there's likely going to be some growth from them.
Okay, so I want to focus on one word especially that Jerry talked about, and that's growth. So we expect when we invest, no matter what that is, that there's going to be a gain. And so fundamentally, the investment we're making is some sort of cost that we're bearing in the present. So when I define investment, and I'm sorry, I hope that's big enough to read, it's foregoing some current benefit, monetary or otherwise, for future gain. So Jerry specifically mentioned money first, right? So we all think about investing in the stock market, potentially. Many of us here are likely saving for retirement or saving generally. So we forego money now, money that could go into our bank account or to buy a nicer car or to buy nicer food. We forego that, and we invest it in something with the hope that it will grow and we'll have it and more in the future. A farmer forgoes eating the seeds that he has and instead plants them in hope that there will be a gain when the harvest comes in the future. That's a little bit difficult for us to think about now because we're not as close to farming as we were even 30 years ago or 50 years ago. But my dad grew up on a farm that they didn't farm commercially, but they farmed to feed themselves, and it was a family of 6, so it's almost a commercial operation. They maintained a 4 or 5 acre garden and raised cattle. And they had to make choices sometimes about whether or not they were going to eat their seed corn or if they were going to hold that seed corn and plant it. And if they didn't, they'd have to buy it, which meant they have to find cash from somewhere, which was a bit of an issue in that household growing up. But that's the way it was for hundreds of years. You didn't go buy, thousands of years, you didn't go buy seed. You got seed from the previous year's harvest, and your family might look at that and decide not to eat it so that you would have something to plant. The most common investment in the United States is some sort of house or a condo or whatever. So that's an investment. You forego some level of finances now in order to have a paid-for house one day, hopefully. That's what we are all hope for in that. But we're going to talk about something a little bit different, and that is we're going to talk about investing in people. And so my question for you first is to think about, can you think of a time that someone invested in you? I want you to think about that time, how it made you feel, and what did that investment in you cost the person who did the investing? Take just a minute. You have a sheet in front of you, and just jot down a couple notes. One I'll share was a man named Barry Fultz. When I was in late middle school, early high school, Barry was a deacon where my parents worshiped in Hendersonville, and he had 3 small children. And at the time, I did not understand the cost that came to him for all the time that he spent with me. But he spent a great deal of time with me, took me to lunch, talked to me about things that my dad talked to me about, but I didn't care about them as much when Dad talked to me about them. But as I've gotten older, and as I've gotten children and a family, I've understood much more deeply the time that Barry spent with me and affected my life in ways that I can't really even explain very well. And it made me feel important. It made me feel loved. And that I had somewhere to go. If I didn't want to talk to my parents, I had someone to go to. And that was so important in my life. What examples do y'all have? Christy?
My stepmom taught me how to drive a stick shift. And she was a member of the church, and that's how she got me to go to church. So she said, if you want to learn to drive, you can drive me to church. But it was a stick shift. So I didn't know how to drive a stick shift, and everybody who has driven a stick shift knows a lot of no, don't put that pedal down, stop doing that, constantly going forward. So it took her time. It was an investment of her time. We had to leave early. We had to make sure that we had enough time to get there, and also we wear and tear on the car and her nerves. So I just appreciate that a lot, because she actually, the whole reason why she wanted me to drive was so that she could do some church.
So I think that's a lovely example. For those that didn't quite hear, Christy's, you said your stepmom, who was a member of the church. If you didn't know this, Christy grew up Catholic. Her stepmom told her she would teach her to drive a stick shift, but she'd only teach her on the way to church. And so that's how she got her to come to worship. That's a great example of someone having a goal for investment in someone, but finding a different means to achieve that than just saying, you have to go to church with me. That's great. What else? Julie?
This is what I told in our group meeting, that in 1995, when Barry and Neil were born, I had 2 older children. My mother came and stayed for 2 weeks, but my dad fractured his back while she was with us. And then my sister also got engaged and was planning a wedding, so my mom was torn in 3 directions. There was an elder's wife at Brentwood named Ruth Walker, who came once a week for a few hours for 4 months to help me out. And then later on, when I was a class teacher and had a lot of running off of material to do, she said, pick a day, let's run everything for this quarter. I'll come and help you count what's left, how many we need, and then you give it all to me and I'll take it and we'll cut it. So she invested quite a bit of time.
Yeah, so that's a great example of when Julie had the twins, she had older children, her mother couldn't help as much as she wanted, and an elder's wife, you said Ruth Walker, came once a week for 4 months to help her with the babies. That is fantastic. And then enabled her service in other ways as well. What other examples? Nicole?
I've had a mentor since I was Teresa, and she was here with me last week, and her investment has looked a lot of different ways throughout my life. It has looked like just someone to ask me questions and to see me when I was young and shy, to someone to help me learn how to cook when I was on my own and floundering, to someone who answered late night crying phone calls and studied the Bible with me and texted giving advice, and that was a lot of, I think, time investment and emotional investment that she spent.
How did it make you feel?
What?
How did it make you feel?
I don't know that I have words for that. Seen and valued, and I would not be the Christian I am today without her. Can't stand it.
So men, I've taken note that none of you said anything. First. Second, I love that example of someone who's changed. The investment has looked different. And if you're ever talking to Nicole and she says Teresa, she means Teresa Kercheval. If she says my Teresa, she means this other Teresa who lives in New York. And the investment that Teresa was making in Nicole changed over decades. What the investment today looks like is not what the investment looked like 20 years ago. What scriptural examples come to mind when you think of examples of people investing in others? And we're going to go ahead and do the first one. You can't say Jesus, I've already taken it. So Jesus is off the list or on the list, whatever. What additional examples can you think of investment in others from the scripture? Joshua?
Paul and Timothy.
That's great, Paul and Timothy. Paul invested in Timothy so much that he wrote him multiple letters to tell him how to do his job. They're great. Michael?
Elijah and Elisha.
Yeah, Elijah and Elisha. The old prophet brings up the new prophet, and in many ways, the young prophet exceeds the older, which is, I assume Elijah was pretty happy about that. What others? Barry? Yeah, Jonathan and David. The question is, who invested in whom? Okay, so Jonathan into David. I had that one on my list as well. What others?
Barnabas and John Mark.
Barnabas and John Mark. So when a schism could have occurred that was quite violent, instead, Barnabas takes John Mark and lets Paul and Timothy go on. And now multiple journeys are happening evangelistically.
Paul and all the churches that he ever went to in Gentile nations.
Yeah, so Paul and just all the churches, we got all kinds of the mail to read that talk about that. What others? Eli and Samuel. That's great. And he took that investment on when Samuel was very young. Chip?
Aquila and Priscilla, when they took Apollos aside.
Yeah. So Aquila and Priscilla take Apollos aside and talk to him. A couple others. I put Abraham and Lot. I think Abraham invested quite a bit in Lot. Was interested that no one said Ruth and Naomi. Were you going to say Ruth and Naomi? Okay. Rahab and the spies. That's a good one. I did not have that one on my list. And then a couple others. I had Elijah and Elisha, the Shunammite woman, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus to Christ, Aquila and Priscilla with Apollos, Dorcas is an example, Barnabas to Saul/Paul. He was Saul first and then Paul afterwards. Remember, Barnabas was the one who would talk to Paul when other brethren wouldn't. And then Barnabas, another example, is Barnabas was sent to the new converts in Antioch to encourage them. He was so good at investing in others, the brethren in Jerusalem sent him to go invest in an entire city's Christians. What we're going to do now is I want to look at 3 of these examples. While we're doing that, you can take some notes on traits or qualities you see in the investor and also some detail on the cost of investment, if that comes to mind. We're gonna look at 3 examples, and then we'll talk about them all together on those qualities, costs, and cost of investment. Qualities, traits, and cost of investment. So first we'll look at Ruth and Naomi. First in chapter 1, verse 14. Just as a quick refresher, at this point, Naomi, at the beginning of chapter 1, moves to Moab with her husband Elimelech and their 2 sons, and the 2 sons marry, and they're there for 10 years, and the husbands and the sons die. And so Naomi is left in Moab with her 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. And Naomi tells the daughters-in-law to leave her, to go back to their families. Don't stay with her. That essentially, she has nothing for them. And that's where we pick up here. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And then at the end of the book of Ruth, this is after Naomi has encouraged Ruth in a relationship with Boaz. Boaz ultimately marries Ruth, becomes a kinsman redeemer, and essentially is a picture of salvation in that redeemer situation. And all the women, it's interesting that we don't really see what all the women say to Ruth. We see what the women say to Naomi. The women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you is more to you than 7 sons has given birth to him." And when it says given birth to him, it's the grandfather of David. He's given birth to Obed. So interesting here that in a culture that put little value often on women and daughters, that here these women come to Naomi and tell her that Ruth is worth more than 7 sons. I actually think it would be difficult in that culture to have complimented Ruth more thoroughly than to call her worth 7 sons. Take a moment or two, write down the traits and qualities you see in Ruth's service, and also what investment and cost you see from her in that. All right, example 2. The Shunammite woman. So this is in 2 Kings. This is an example with Elisha. This is after Elijah has passed on, or has been taken up, to say that better. And Elisha is now the prophet of God who's, in many cases, wandering the earth, dealing with problems all over the place. And we'll start in 2 Kings 4, verse 8. One day, Elisha went to Shunem, where a wealthy woman lived who urged him to eat some food. So whenever he passed that way, he would turn in there to eat food. And she said to her husband, "Behold, I know that this is a holy man of God who is continually passing our way. Let us make a small room on the roof with walls and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp, so that whenever he comes to us, he can go in there." A couple interesting things about this story. One, it says that she's a wealthy woman, and then she tells her husband to do something. That's a very interesting relationship. How she's a wealthy woman, but it doesn't refer to him as a wealthy man is a very interesting situation. I don't know what that means about their family, but that's relatively unusual. There's some more detail here. They don't have any children. Later on in this story, Elisha tells them that they'll have a child. Later, that child dies, and this is that story in 2 Kings 8 where Elisha lays down on the body of the boy, and it says the warmth of Elisha passes into the boy, and he becomes alive again. What traits and qualities do you see in this Shunammite woman and in her service? And what did her investment in Elisha cost? Take a moment, and we'll talk about example 3 after that. All right, let's look at the third example. Apollos in Ephesus. From Acts 18. Now a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was an eloquent man, competent in the Scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in spirit, he spoke and taught accurately the things concerning Jesus, though he knew only the baptism of John. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue, but when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. And when he wished to cross to Achaia, the brothers encouraged him and wrote to the disciples to welcome him. When he arrived, he greatly helped those who through the grace had believed, for he powerfully refuted the Jews in public, showing by the Scriptures that the Christ was Jesus. As you take notes on this one, I encourage you to look at more than just the relationship between Aquila and Priscilla. There's quite a bit of investment going on in these 4 verses. Jot down a few notes about the service and what their investments would have cost them. All right, let's talk about these a little bit. When you look at these 3, look back over your notes a little bit, what are the traits and qualities that you see among these servants that are doing this investing? And what do you see the various costs of that investment being?
Well, in Ruth's case, she gave up everything to go and follow.
Yeah, so Ruth gave up everything. She did not go back to her family. I would say one of the things that you would say was a cost for Ruth is she bore the anxiety or the stress of being with a widow who had nothing. And instead of leaving that widow and going back to her people, she stayed with her. So that's a high cost. Even though she didn't outlay any money, she cost much. Or cost her much, I should say. Chip?
Think of investing and what we might be getting in return. I captured that same thought that she gave up her whole life in exchange for Naomi's life.
Yes.
She enriched Naomi's life.
Yeah, she gave up her own life in order to save Naomi. Crystal? So Crystal said devotion and loyalty run through all 3. You really see it, the Ruth and Naomi one, it's really palpable, right? But what about the widow, or the woman, the Shunammite woman? What traits or qualities do you see in her in addition to that? Barry?
Well, she didn't just take her wealth and live a nice, comfortable life. She was looking for ways to actually do something and to invest in somebody. And she sees this guy going by and figures that he's someone probably pretty important to the something and have this ready for him. That little passage has always been used to refer to keeping a preacher during a gospel meeting. And
We do like to put them on the roof.
yeah, as long as you had those things, that would be absolutely fantastic. I don't always get those.
Yeah. So she goes to great, really, I would say cost, first off. She spent some money. She also compelled Elisha to stay, right? She told him, she instructed him to come here, so much so that in the future he knew that this wasn't like a one-time invitation, and he was like, well, we'll just knock on there and see if they have food again. Instead, her compelling him was so clear that he knew anytime he went by there that he and his servant Gehazi were welcome to stop and eat at the table of the Shunammite woman. And then she literally gave him part of her house. Chip?
Yeah, and that's the one that I actually wrote down. I don't know that at first I see any expectation for a return on that investment,
Yes.
other than the satisfaction of being hospitable.
Yes. Yeah, so Chip's point here of like, she didn't expect a return. At least we're not told she did. And that's true for all of these people, right? Ruth didn't stay with Naomi expecting she was going to get a husband out of the deal. But I think we need to acknowledge that through service and service of others, the Lord will find ways to bless. It's not that we serve because we'll be blessed, but instead, we can rest assured that the Lord will bless us as we sow and then reap his blessings. Let's talk about Apollos and Ephesus. What all do y'all see there?
You see kindness on the part of Priscilla by taking this out.
Yeah, so you see kindness from Aquila and Priscilla. I think it also speaks to, I like that at least the ESV says they instructed him. It didn't say they admonished or rebuked him. They took him aside, I anticipate with kindness, and showed him the better way. What other examples of investment do you see in those 4 verses? Callie?
Like vulnerability, like I think if we see something wrong, our instinct might be to reject it, but instead they gently instruct it, and that requires vulnerability that they might not accept that, or there's a lot of they gave up emotional security.
Yeah, they had to open themselves up in some ways to do that with him, because that could have led to an argument. So they put themselves in some risk, if you want to think of it that way. Christy?
The other brethren took the time to write letters to
Yeah.
the brethren that he was going to be going to. And those brethren, in turn, took him in and welcomed him. And I think, when you do that, when you're writing that about someone that they don't know, you kind of put your reputation on the line a little bit there, vouching for that
Yeah.
person, that this person is going to be all the things that, I'm saying he's going to be.
Right.
And then taking that the other brethren taking those first brethren's word for it and welcome.
Yeah, the brethren that wrote the letters, that took time, likely took money, right? They didn't have the U.S. Postal Service. It wasn't like 55 cents or whatever it is now, and you put it in the mail and it shows up. But potentially, when it says they sent letters, that means they potentially sent emissaries who took those letters, right? So they bore cost, they bore a lot of work, all and risk to their reputation if it doesn't go well, all to aid him in his work. Joshua?
Priscilla and Aquila invested in Apollos, and then Apollos went and took that investment and doubled it by going to this other congregation and encouraging them.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we start these verses with, there's an eloquent man from Alexandria who uses all of his talents to share what he knows. He's then corrected in that teaching, and then he goes and teaches more people. And in that way, Apollos is also one who's investing in all those he comes in contact with. Barry?
There are certain ones today who would not have bothered to talk to him, just called him a false teacher.
Yes. So instead of calling him a false teacher, and rebuking him, they instructed him with what I have to believe is kindness. Chip?
Throughout all three, since that was the first look we had, was where we see in all three. Ultimately, the receivers of the investment accepted the investment. And there's a lesson in there for people who are trying to invest in us, how we receive that.
Yes. Yeah, we have to be willing to receive the investment for it to actually cause change. Donald?
I think also this idea of his willingness to speak. You see that verse 25 and verse 28. And that's significant because he was taught the way more accurately. He didn't think to himself, well, I already know this, what y'all are telling me, I'm not willing to take that. And that could have discouraged him, and yet verse 28 receives him and teaches.
Yeah, he takes that instruction and continues it. Yeah. So in all of these, what would you say is the number one investment that happens? Time. Above all else, time represents the greatest cost of all, the greatest value, and truly when we're investing in people, it is the currency, the primary currency we will spend to do so. The problem with time is it can't be replaced. I can earn more money, I can work a second job, I can do those things, I can build another house, whatever. But once I've spent my time, it can't come back to me. You don't get some sort of returns process at Target for your time that you spent that didn't go well. You spend it and it's gone. No returns. It has very real limits. All of us have to sleep. We have to eat. We have families we need to care for. And most of us have jobs we have to work. And in between all of that, that's where our extra time is that we have to invest in others. In our family, during the week, that's basically 2 to 4 hours at most. Between the time of 5:30 and 9:30, potentially we could use that time to do something else. But it comes at a cost, right? If me or Crystal is going to do that, that means we're not at home to care for children or to spend time with each other or to do other things. There's a very real opportunity cost, and there's a limit. Most of us can't meet between 2 and 4 a.m., right? Like the clock has limits. We don't even really have 24 hours to work with, right? Most of us have low single-digit hours per day that we could even consider investing in other people. And then I'd also say that our time is more costly as we age. There's lots of resources that we have in our life that as we age, they're easier. Often as we age, we've saved some money, we've hopefully bought that house, we've done some things that make a lot of things easier. But in my experience, at least, as I'm getting older, there are more demands on my time, not less. There's more requests to spend time with me, not less. And I think that's true for most of us. And so that makes our time more expensive because I have lots of other things I could spend that time on when I'm choosing to use it to invest in others. This series of lessons that we're studying this year talk about practical applications of love in a church. And so I want to share some of those as we close. And not just any church. Thankfully, I go to a wonderful group that has lots of examples that we can talk about here. Most of you don't know the man driving the tractor, but some of you do. That's Don Roberts. We just announced that his bride, Lane, passed away. Don preceded her in death. But Don was a very active member of this group for a long, long time. Was an elder, did many things. This is Chloe. And when you want to talk about the investment of time, these two pictures are taken 2 years apart from each other. Don invested in everyone that would let him. He looked like an unassuming old man that you might just kind of write off if you walked past him. But as soon as you came into his sphere, he invested in you. And investing in a 4-year-old looks like them riding on your tractor. Investing in what was then a late 20-year-old, my wife, is giving her daffodil bulbs, which we just moved to our new house. You know some of these folks. The picture on the left is Chrissy this morning. Judah, who some of you know loves cameras, has discovered that Chrissy controls quite a few of them. And so he started visiting her. And someone who is busy working to make certain the assembly goes across well could say, I don't have time for this child in here. And instead, she said, will you flip these 2 switches? And it doesn't seem like much to a 5-year-old now, but those small investments over years will build a relationship between them. You see Michelle Thomas in the middle picture. That diapered child is Harmony. And Michelle was diligently helping us pack our home in October 2022. And when Harmony wanted to help, Michelle didn't say, there's a lot to pack. She said, will you hold this box here? And last week when we moved into our new house, I wish I had a picture of it, Harmony was in our new bonus room holding screws for Michelle. On the right is Alan with Declan. He invests in everyone that lets him in his life. If you don't let him in, I would encourage you to. This is a list I made in about 5 minutes at my desk. If you don't know, Chad has more breakfasts and lunches than almost anyone else on the planet with other people. I'm concerned for both his credit card bill and his waistline. I think the count, when I talked to Chad recently, is, are you doing 18 to 20 a month right now? Something like that? We want to talk about investing in spiritual leaders. The time that Barry's spending with Drew Hull and David Deloge now. It's going to create men who are doing and will do things that carry Barry's legacy forward for a long, long time. When we had to leave our home, we didn't know where Karen was going to go. And not even a week before the Teshids had finished as loose, didn't even have a ceiling, really, their basement. And they immediately said, Karen can live with us. No thought beyond what can we do to serve. Brian, the get-togethers you planned last year were a blessing to all of us, an investment in the way this group spends time together. I can't really go into all the details of how many people have lived with Danny and Kathy. If you think of hospitality as feeding people a meal and then sending them home, which is often the hospitality we do in our house, it is vastly different from the hospitality that Danny and Kathy have done in theirs. For some 30 years, they've had people not directly related to them living with them. And most of those people, as far as I know, were not Christians when Danny and Kathy welcomed them. The guys that get together in the Well Coffee House at Saturdays at 6 a.m. or Fridays at 6 a.m., we always have something to study. I'm pretty sure all of us would be willing to read like the back of a box of Frosted Flakes and then discuss it just so we could be together. But we get up at 6 a.m. We could be asleep. And I can't tell you how great it is. Some of us have heard Barry and Louie joke, but this is a really real one. The amount of time that Barry spent studying with Louie before and after he was baptized. It's an example of loving someone and their soul more than that person does. When Crystal started Coffee and Conversations, and then Belinda's continuing it, that's for service and love to the people here. In our family, the role that Allison, Elizabeth, and Nicole play in Autumn and Chloe's life is immeasurable. Judy Reinhardt didn't like to drive when it's dark, so she bums rides off of people. Last night, we were one of those people. But the most frequent person is Brad. Brad Lamb brings Judy most nights when it's dark. It's not really convenient for him, like he says it is, but it adds 20 minutes to his commute to worship. So is that convenient? No, it's not. But he still does it. The last one I'll mention is our elders on Monday nights. They would tell you that they wouldn't want me to put this on the list. Every person I'm close to that has visited here and heard that our elders are here every Monday night are dumbfounded. This is not normal. If you think it's normal, it's because you've worshiped here. It's not normal. It's because they're investing in us and in our souls. And so, the reason why I'm sharing these examples is not to blow anybody up on here, but to say we already have examples in our congregation of the practical applications of love in a church. And so if you're looking for some, there's some on the list. So if you're not doing some of these, feel free to pick one up. No one's going to care if you plagiarize a little bit and take their idea. We have examples of application here. And so I urge you to excel still more. We've been studying 1 Thessalonians in our Sunday morning class. I'm going to read verses 9 through 12 of chapter 4. Now concerning brotherly love, you have no need for anyone to write you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love one another. For that indeed is what you are doing to all the brothers throughout Macedonia. But we urge you, brothers, to do this more and more, and to aspire to live quietly, and to mind your own affairs, and to work with your hands as we instructed you, so that you may walk properly before outsiders and be dependent on no one. Brethren, as Paul encouraged the Thessalonians, I encourage you to do this more and more. Within it, we have the power to build one another up and to save the souls of our brethren. Thank you for your attention. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about love, and I look forward to doing this again in about 3 months on our next topic. Let's stand together and sing.